Hey, y'all. This is Crazy Nurse Granny here. We're Crazy Nose Crazy. And it's crazy in that YouTube world out there, y'all. So I want to tell you what happened to Crazy Nurse Granny when she went to the store this weekend, okay? Now, something you have to understand and know is that Crazy Nurse Granny's not like most of those women out there. Crazy Nurse Granny doesn't like to go shopping, and I haven't for years and years. It's just a pain in my tail, okay? Now, listen, we were having a family dinner, and I decided that I would go to the grocery store and get all the groceries. Everybody thought that was funny because I don't like going to the store. So anyway, I went to the store. And I was at the meat counter. And I was looking at some really good chitlins, you know. Y'all know what chitlins are, don't you? And I was bending over the meat counter. And all of a sudden, I felt this little pinch on my hiney tail. I turned around, and there was this dirty old man standing there. If it had been a sweet young thing, I would have been smiling ear to ear. But this man's nose hairs were so long, I could hear his breath whistling through his nose, and his nose hairs touched his top lip. I felt horrible. I felt violated. I was shocked. I was humiliated. I just wanted to, So, I stood there a minute, and he had a grin on his face from ear to ear. So I just didn't pay attention to him. And when he turned around, I pinched him on his tail. And he looked at me, and he smiled. But you know what? At least when I walked out of that store, I didn't feel violated. I felt like I'd taken my power back, and I had shown him that he had not messed with me because I was okay with who I am. So then I went out into the parking lot, and I went to my car, and I put the groceries in the back seat, okay? And then I remembered I forgot to get the wine and chocolate. So we'll hurry back in the store. I got the wine and chocolate, and I was feeling real proud of myself because I don't like to grocery shop, and I'd done a good job. So I went out there to get in my car, and my car was gone. Well, I looked around a little bit, and I found my car. And I realized I had put my groceries in the back seat of somebody else's car. So, anyway, but the reason I'm telling you that story is because when that man pitched me on the butt, he made me a victim of his, right? And I could have left there feeling shame and humiliation and just been upset, but instead, I took my power back by doing something that didn't cause me any more harm, but made me feel empowered. And I didn't feel like a victim anymore. You see? Well, okay, everybody. I know there's a lot of people out there that are going through a lot of pain and suffering because they've been victims. And you know, you can be victims of so many different things. And I know I have. And a lot of times, if we're victimized in our life, we become victims. And we stay that way throughout our whole life because it's all that we know. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. When I was 3 years old, as early as I can remember, but my grandfather, he abused me. And the earliest I remember is 3 years old. So pretty much that went on till I was 12. And as a child, I became a victim very young, and I took on the role of a victim very young. But as a child, you don't realize that you do that. And because I was a victim already, when my mom would drink and she'd become angry and mean, I was the child who took on the scapegoat role. And that's the role of the child in the family that will act out to take on the negative behavior from the parent who is being abusive. So I would be naughty, so my mom would put all her anger and all her feelings onto me, and that saved my brothers and sisters from getting attacked by my mother. So I took on the victim role there. But I didn't realize I was doing that. And you know what? I didn't realize I was doing that until I was almost 30 years old. And you know how I figured out that I was living my life as a victim? I figured that out when I went into a women's group where we all had group discussions about things that we'd been through and discussed our problems. And there was one woman there, and she was in her 30s, and she was crying and moaning and groaning, and she'd never worked a day in her life. She'd never been married. She didn't have any children. She went to college for like 10 years. Her parents were very wealthy. They paid for her apartment. They paid for her car. They paid for everything for her. But my point is, she was sitting there talking about being a victim of her parents and everyone else. And she blamed all her problems on everybody else. When I sat there and listened to her talk, blaming everybody else for all the things that had happened to her in her life, I realized that she made me sick to my stomach. But the reason she made me sick to my stomach is because I was living just like that. I was blaming my parents. I was blaming my husband. I was blaming everybody else for what was wrong with me in my life. And it wasn't my fault. Well, as long as I continued to blame everybody else for the bad things that happened to me, my life wasn't going to change. Now, when I was a child and my grandfather abused me and my mother was abusive to me emotionally, I had no control over that. So I was a victim. But once I became adult, if someone victimized me, I had more choices I could make. I could choose who I wanted to be around, who I wanted to spend my time with, and who I wanted to waste my energy on. And once you realize that you're the only one that can rescue yourself from being a victim, you start to make life changes that make your life go in a much better direction where you can move forward. So then, for the first time in my life, I started living healthier because I identified that I could make choices that if somebody was victimizing me, I could remove myself from the situation and do what I needed to do to be okay and to be healthy and move forward. I didn't have to allow them to victimize me. Just like the guy in the grocery store. I empowered myself and I did what felt right to me, and I wasn't the victim because I didn't let him take away what was good inside of me and what felt good and powerful. I gave it right back to him. But don't do that if it's a dangerous situation. I knew I was safe. Okay, so the point I want to make in this video is that everybody's victimized. We're all victimized in different ways throughout our life by a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. But how we deal with that and how we learn from that and grow from that is what makes us the better person. Okay, now, I want to finish this up by saying that a lot of times when you're victimized, the person that victimizes you, they're not open to hear what you have to say. They don't have any empathy, or they don't care that they hurt you in whatever way that they hurt you, because their motive was self-gratification. And they don't have the ability to feel any empathy for how you're suffering because they victimized you. Now, what you can do is you can do what you need to do to move forward and learn from it. And if someone that's victimized you is not approachable, then what you need to do is, if you can write them a letter, and if you can send it, great. But if they're dead or you can't send it, write it for yourself. And then you can burn it or bury it, and that can be representation of letting go. Because when you let go, it's not for them. When you forgive them, it's for yourself. Because when you give forgiveness and you move forward, then that means you have grown and you're a better person. And you've taken control. And you're not letting that person who's hurt you control anything you do at all. So, if the person that's hurt you is not going to even hear what you have to say, or it doesn't even matter to them, forgive them for yourself so you can move forward and you can be free and not in their control anymore. Because until you forgive them inside of yourself, you can't move forward and move on. So this is Crazy Nurse Granny here saying, we all get victimized and it hurts, but don't let them keep your power. Move on, because you're worthy. Dang it. Love y'all.